Hello, I'm Mr. Thomas, and I will be your philosophy instructor for this second summer session. So today we're just going to have a basic, just an introduction to sort of what we're up to in philosophy. Obviously, if you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to me, and I'll be happy to answer those. And I look forward to reading some of this material that we'll be going over this semester. And I hope you get a lot out of the course. This is a course that, if you approach it in the right way, it can be more than just a class that you take in college. Really, a lot of the classes you take in college, if approached in the right way, can have the impact of deepening you a little more, even in classes that might have more of a technical sort of bent to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of give us a little quick intro here on what we're doing in philosophy. And first of all, let me just say, in any class, your professors usually have a particular point of view. And usually you'll have professors who will say that I'm not here to change the way you think or tell you how you should think about things. I'm just here as a sort of a disinterested, uh, maybe purveyor of knowledge. But I will say that I certainly do have a viewpoint on things, and those things can't help but come out sometimes. And I'm sure any class that you've had, and this has been my experience too, usually I've had professors who would say, well, I'm kind of impartial. And then after a couple of weeks into the class, you kind of get a sense of maybe sort of where the professor is coming from. So first of all, let me just say this. In this class, as we go through the semester, please make sure that you are sort of expressing what you think to be sort of the way things are, the way that you see things, okay? There is no grade coercion in this class. You do not have to parrot back anything that you think I might like to hear, okay? Part of philosophy is ethics. And if for some reason I gave you the impression that your grade would probably be better if you sort of parroted sort of maybe back to me certain things that I might be more partial to, I would be tacitly teaching you to lie, which would seem sort of ironic with you being in a philosophy class. So just know there's no grade coercion. This class is one in which you have to be free to express what you think about things, right? But also in philosophy, we're trying to learn something about the world too. And you may learn something from the various philosophers that we read, even if you don't particularly agree with all of them. And you might learn or get a new insight from me on how I see things, maybe. And it's certainly the case, and I think this would be true of hopefully a lot of your professors. I learn things from my students and gain deeper appreciation into certain aspects of life that maybe I was not aware of, or it just sort of deepens you when you sort of have the experience of talking to other people or engaging people in a different way. And it sort of gives you a deeper appreciation of the wonderful sort of complexity and beauty of just humanity. Okay, so you're in a philosophy class, and I'm sure most of you have probably thought a lot of these things that we're going to be talking about over the semester, but maybe not necessarily in such a pointed manner as we're going to do. But let me just say that philosophy is, a lot of times people get philosophy confused with psychology. And certainly there's some overlap there because philosophy deals sort of with thinking and with ideas, and obviously psychology, that's what you're trying to understand. But philosophy is sort of going a little deeper than that. And so, first of all, we would just say if we're just asking what philosophy is, etymologically, the word literally means love of wisdom. And so, philosophia, and that term is actually given to us by Pythagoras. And if any of you remember your geometry and the Pythagorean theorem, Pythagoras was a thinker who lived, which would be modern day Italy. But Pythagoras had created sort of a monastic community there, and part of their understanding of sort of liberating oneself and attaining enlightenment and knowledge was to understand the world through numbers. And Pythagoras is famous for saying that men or human beings are not wise, only the gods are wise, and men can only love wisdom. Right. Now, there may be some of you in here that may not necessarily be religious, and that's absolutely fine. But I think you could probably understand the idea that probably no one human being has the totality of wisdom, that all human beings to some extent are ignorant or can't maybe see things in their fullest extent. But in philosophy, that's what we're really trying to do. Philosophy is asking sort of the big questions. And so right here, I have this thing where I'm saying that philosophy is both an art and it's an aim. Okay, so philosophy is an art and an aim. And I think it would be helpful for me to kind of define what I mean by an art. And I'll say this a couple of times so you can get it down because it's an important idea. But let's just say for our purposes that an art, and when I say art, you might be thinking of painting or maybe dance or the fine arts here. But art has a much sort of broader sort of definition than that. And so an art, we're going to say, is a rationally guided activity to achieve a goal or an end. So an art is a rationally guided activity to achieve a goal or an end. Okay? And so if we think about the art of baking, okay, baking is an art. Okay, I was in culinary school for a couple of years. I was studying a little while to be a chef until I decided that I liked cooking, but I didn't know if I'd want to do that for a living because that's a lot of nights, weekends, and holidays. And I was newly married and I wasn't seeing my wife as often as I would like. So I decided to sort of change maybe my career path. But certainly people who are bakers, there is a pretty exact science to that. You're dealing with fats and sugars and heats, and so there's a chemical process. So if you're going to be a really good baker, baking is a rationally guided activity. Okay, if I was going to build a home, that usually comes under the art of architecture and engineering. Those are rationally guided activities to achieve an end. What is the end? The building of a home. What is the rationally guided activity of baking? To produce a cake or baked goods like bread or things like that. And many of you in this class are probably majoring in some form of medical science, whether you want to be a doctor or a nurse or a physical therapist or something like that. Those are all rationally guided activities. okay, to achieve a goal, which the goal would be the sort of the preservation and the prevention maybe of disease or preservation of health. Okay. Well, philosophy is an art. Okay. And at this point, we'll just say that the art of philosophy is making distinctions. The art of philosophy is making distinctions. So, for instance, right up here we have this little definition from Pythagoras that philosophy is the love of wisdom. Well, what do we actually mean by that? Because really, particularly when you see this when we come to Plato, but you'll also see it in Nietzsche, who's a philosopher that we're going to read as well. What do we mean by love exactly, right? We use that word love in a very sort of loose manner. And, I can say, I love going to the beach, or I love going to eat at this particular restaurant, or I love a great day. Those are certain ways of using love, but it's saying, I love going to this restaurant. Is that idea of love the same as saying, I love my mother, or I love my wife, or I love my son and daughter? Obviously, we could probably make a distinction between the love of a restaurant and then the love of your mom or something like that. Hopefully, there would be a sort of a difference there, right? And so that's a distinction we can make. Really, what do we mean here by love? Well, here, love would mean something different than I love eating at this particular restaurant. Here, this might mean a love where there is a sort of a commitment. And obviously, things that we love, we're sort of committed to. If I love this restaurant, I'm committed to going to it. But my commitment to wanting to go to this restaurant is not the same commitment I might have for the love of my parents that I have, because they're getting older and they can't do things that they normally used to be able to do. And I care for my parents and I want to help them. Or the love that I have for my son and my daughter, all right? And I want to try to help them. So there's a sort of a deeper commitment there than maybe my commitment to going to this kind of restaurant that I like. And then we have this idea of wisdom. Like, what do we mean by wisdom? I mean, certainly wisdom is a form of knowing, right? But is wisdom just knowing stuff in your head, or is it something deeper than that? Most people would say that wisdom is a little different than just knowing a lot. I'm sure a lot of you probably in growing up in school, maybe you had friends who were actually quite bright and maybe bright in school, but in terms of wisdom and understanding things, they may have been a little deficient. Maybe they lacked a certain common sense. And it could also be the fact that maybe you have people in your family, maybe a grandparent or a parent, or maybe some other person that you know in your family, and maybe they haven't achieved a high degree of education in the sense that they have a PhD in something or a master's degree. I know my grandmother, she certainly had, she only had a high school education. She graduated high school. But my grandmother just had a lot of insight into things. And so there's a sense in which understanding or wisdom has this idea of sort of understanding, being able to kind of put things in their proper perspective. Okay. And that's kind of what we're wanting to do in philosophy. Really, when we get down to it, philosophy really wants to know what is it all about? And this is not necessarily my definition. There was a mathematician and philosopher of science named Alfred North Whitehead, who lived, he died probably in the early 20th century, but he's one of the founders of symbolic logic. So this guy was a very smart person, obviously very mathematically astute. But he said basically in a lecture one time that he gave at Harvard that really philosophy is this question: what is it all about? What is life all about? Okay. And we certainly, at various stages, have probably had this question, particularly, I think, over the past few months in dealing with the pandemic and then sort of the protests that we've been having and things. A lot of people are trying to figure out like what's going on, and a lot of people are saying, we should be focusing on living in a better way and treating people in a different sort of manner. Well, that's kind of hinting around at this question, like, what is it all about? What should it be about, right? So in philosophy, we have this idea, it's an art where the art is making distinctions, like what do we mean by love? What do we mean by wisdom? If we were to ask the question, we want to make a just society. Well, I think most people would nod their heads and say, yes, we should make a just society. But if any of you have ever had this experience, particularly if you're on social media, you've certainly seen where people are talking about maybe we should work for a just society. Everybody sort of agrees on that in a general sense. But when you get to the particulars, there sometimes seems to be a divergence of opinion on what that looks like or how we do that. Okay? Well, philosophy is trying to work through that. And so, in that sense, philosophy is the art of making distinctions. But as an aim, it is sort of this idea of we're trying to find out what it's all about. What is life all about? And I'll just kind of give you my definition, and this is my definition. You don't have to subscribe to this at all if you don't necessarily think this is sort of what it would be like. But, it's just kind of what I think. But I think that philosophy is ultimately an art with the aim of helping us to understand the order and mystery of reality. Okay, the order and mystery of reality. And certainly things can look sort of chaotic. I mean, a volcanic eruption looks sort of chaotic. Forest fire looks chaotic. If a meteor were to, God forbid, come and hit the planet, and there would just be an explosion and a lot of wreckage and catastrophe and destruction. But even those things follow a particular order. I mean, gravity, heat, right? A volcanic eruption deals with plate tectonics, and that certainly follows a certain sort of order. Like I said, many of you may be in here focusing on medicine or some career in healthcare. Well, there's certainly an order there. I mean, doctors just don't come in and just start doing stuff with you, okay? They proceed in a methodological sort of fashion. So there is a certain order to the world. That's not to say that there isn't a certain randomness or chance things that happen, okay? But we can recognize that there is an order. The doctor who is working on the other side of the world in China or in Africa or Australia or Canada, the United States, Europe, the human physiology is all going to be sort of the same. So there's sort of an appreciation of the order, understanding the order, okay? But then there's something absolutely sort of mysterious about life. I just got finished teaching a class in the first summer session, and we read a particular book that sort of deals with these bigger questions like this. And I had one student who was pretty perceptive, and he said that, I'm in the medical field, and I'm working in the medical field, and I'm taking classes on physiology. And, he said, I can understand sort of what life looks like in a plant or in an animal or in a human being, but really what life is itself, I have a hard time expressing what that is, right? And I mean, just think about that. I mean, if we're just talking about what is life, okay? Well, if you were to say, well, life is a living thing, well, what does it mean for something to be alive, okay? Because we certainly have inanimate objects in the world, and inanimate, animus means kind of soul. So if you're inanimate, you have no soul, and by this it just means it's not living, right? So what is the difference between something that's animate, that has life, and inanimate? Where does the life come in? And certainly anything that's alive that we know of in this world, whether it's plant, animal, and then humans or animals, but humans do look to be animals of a different sort. We are certainly all in matter. We have matter, okay? We're tangible. And I have the same thing in my body that an animal has, and maybe a rose has, which is some form of water or moisture, right? But water is not alive, okay? And even if we were to say, well, it does look like in living things, there is, particularly in animals, but maybe even to some degree in plants, that there are little electrical currents and things. Maybe life is electricity. Well, but an electrical charge like static electricity or a lightning bolt is not alive. Now, it may be the precondition for life, but it may not be life itself. The human body may be a precondition for life, but you wouldn't want to say it's life itself. Why? Because there are plants that are living that aren't human. There are animals, like my dog that just went and laid on the couch over here, is alive but not human. So there's a sort of a mystery there, or there should be a mystery there, I think. That's not to say that we can't study things scientifically and gain a greater degree of understanding about our world, and we certainly should do that. But there are elements of our world that in some sense are just sort of mysterious. And so where things are mysterious, they kind of call for contemplation, which is mean to sort of reflect on and think about, right? So now you might not feel that way, and that's perfectly fine, but that's just sort of how I'm laying that out. So if we're asking what is it all about, this sort of falls under what I would call the perennial questions. All right, so the perennial questions. And I have a number of perennial questions here, okay? And if any of you, maybe some of you have done gardening or worked with maybe your parents like to garden or grandparent, and you may have heard of perennial plants. And they are plants that sort of come back every year, okay? And perennis in Latin means sort of everlasting. So these are everlasting questions, which means these questions keep coming up in every culture, throughout all time, there's never been a culture anywhere on the planet where people have not asked these questions in one form or another. Usually, if we go back far enough, these questions are initially found in the various mythological traditions of different cultures. So, I mean, certainly you have Greek mythology, but you have Norse mythology. You have the mythology in India, like the Ramayanas or the Vedic poems. I remember a class I took. I was a religious studies major as an undergraduate, and I took a class with on indigenous religions. So these were religions that were found in Australia with the Aborigines, or in Africa or South America, or the Native Americans. And certainly there are mythological traditions there. And all these people are asking the same sort of questions. So a perennial question here, the first one would be like, who am I? Okay. That's a question that most people have sort of thought. Now, most of you know who you are in a certain sense. I mean, you know, your name and where you live, and maybe who your family members are, and things like that, and kind of where you come from. But then there's also a sense in which you're still trying to figure out who you are. Now, that's sort of an odd thing, because no one has been with you as much as your own self. No, your parents or whatever can't climb into your, into your thoughts and express what you're feeling and thinking. And yet there's a certain element of ourselves that we're kind of an enigma or a mystery to ourselves. I mean, really, to be honest with you, when you say, who am I? It might even be better to think of, like, what am I as a human being? Really, what does that mean to be a human being? Animals are certainly very fascinating creatures, but an animal is like my dog, who I love very much, is not on the same level as me in terms of sort of rational ability. Now, that doesn't mean animals don't have certain sensory perceptions that human beings don't have, right? But my dog is utterly uninterested in what I'm doing right now. And you might be utterly uninterested in what I'm doing right now. So, so the idea here is that that there's something different about the human person. Sorry about that. So anyway, so there's something mysterious about human beings. Who are we, right? And the other question would be, why am I here? Like, what is ultimately my purpose in this world? And certainly, I mean, if we were to ask in general, why are you here right now? You have to take a class, right? It's sort of a required thing to do to be able to get the required credit so you can kind of move on in your majors. And most of you are here because you want to achieve some sort of career goal. But certainly beyond career goals, there are other things that you may be looking for, right? Friendship, love, to have a home, maybe a family one day. And so the question is that is there more to life than just sort of trying to meet your everyday needs? Certainly we have to work. We have to take care of ourselves. Like I usually say when people ask me how I'm doing, I'm saying, well, I'm raising the kids and paying the mortgage. That's a lot of life, right? But certainly there's more to it. And even in the sense of raising my kids, it's not just an obligation in that sense. I mean, certainly it's obligatory, but if that was the only reason why, I had any kind of interaction with my kids because I had to, That would sort of make me a little suspect as a father, I would think. At least my parents, and certainly nobody's perfect, but I got the sense that, even though, sometimes, particularly when I was a teenager, we could butt heads. I overall had the general sense that my parents were looking out for me, right? But why am I here? What is my purpose? What is the purpose of human beings? Um, the philosopher Karl Marx uh, once made a statement that anything that's not the object of utility, and by utility, he's basically saying anything that's not the object to being put to use for something is worthless or useless. Um, well, that makes a sense if we're talking about this whiteboard here. The purpose of this whiteboard is for me to kind of teach and write on it and convey some ideas and information, right? The purpose of this laptop is for me to be able to do work. It's an object of the utility. If it doesn't work, it is sort of useless, right? But what about a human being? I just alluded to my parents a little while ago, and my parents have gotten older, and there's some things that they used to do that they can't do now. They're not necessarily contributing to the GDP, but does that mean people who can't do that are useless in the same way that a laptop that doesn't work is useless? Well, I would hope the answer would be no, right? So obviously, when I say why we're here, there's something more than just being able to work, because there are a lot of people in this world for various reasons that aren't able to work to the level of other people. My wife works with a lot of people who have various disabilities, and some of these people are able to find work and are able to do some things, and that's a very great good. But some of the people that she works with are people that they're wheelchair bound and maybe nonverbal. Well, those people can't do the same sort of things like an able-bodied person could. Well, does that mean then that they have no value? Well, if you're going to look at a human being like a hammer, I guess you would say yes. But maybe that's the wrong way to look at a human being. Okay. Um, and, there's a certain sense in which we could even uh, say the same thing about just things in nature. Uh, that's why we have national parks. I mean, there's nothing wrong with using trees for lumber to build things and to make paper and everything. Uh, but does every natural resource that we have to be used to produce something else? That's part of the reason why, President Roosevelt created the national parks, where there could be these spaces where human beings could go and enjoy nature. All right. Um, and so that kind of gets this idea of, and I'm kind of hinting around, is then how should we actually live? I mean, there seems to be more to life than just working, or hopefully working. Um, I teach at a private school here in town, beyond my teaching here at Lone Star. This is kind of I guess my side gig, we could say. And a lot of my parents, they're either doctors or lawyers or engineers. A lot of people work in oil and gas and that sort of thing. And a lot of them have achieved a high degree of success. And just talking to them sometimes about things in life, and we're kind of talking about their kids. They certainly want their kids to be able to work and function in the world and do well and stuff. But, a lot of conversations I've had with these parents that they want their children have a deeper sense of what's important in life too. Family, friendship, sort of giving back to their community, looking out for other people, just sort of appreciating life, And so that's a perennial question. Then we have another one like this, like, why is there evil? Why do bad things happen in the world? Now, when we look at a philosopher like Friedrich Nietzsche, he's going to really, in a certain sense, deny that evil even exists. Well, that's a philosophical question. Is there really evil? Or is it just the sense that people don't like certain sort of things? Okay? If we're looking at Plato and then maybe Pieper, they are going to say there is a real good and there is a real evil. Someone like a Nietzsche is going to deny that there is a real moral good and a real moral evil. The only thing that exists really is the exercise of power. Well, that's certainly a philosophical question that's worth considering. Most of these things have usually been dealt with in all cultures in the world, usually through religion. But there's a certain sense in which, at least in the modern West, society is not as religiously motivated as it once was. Well, then what do you do with a question like this, then? How do we understand it? Is it just sort of psychological states? Is it really kind of due to maybe economic conditions or social conditions and that sort of thing? And then there's probably another question is, what is after death? Like, what happens to us after we die? There is an answer to that question. It's the law of the excluded middle in logic that just basically says that for any proposition A and not A, so a proposition would be, in this sense, there is life after death, or there is no life after death. Okay? Well, it holds that for any proposition A, there is life after death, or not A, there is no life after death. There is no middle position. Okay? There either is or there is not. Okay? Now, someone might say, well, there is, maybe there's no life, but there's just a transference of energy. Okay? Well, okay, we could maybe say that. But is energy, all energy, naturally conscious? Because we are sort of conscious about what goes on in the world. Maybe conscious in the way that a thunderbolt is not. Okay? But certainly energy just doesn't look like it completely, you have people who are sort of quantum mechanics and physicists and stuff that says that just energy transitions states in between certain material objects. So, the question is what is after death? Okay? And then the big question here is, why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there all of this? Couldn't there be nothing? At one point in our universe, at least this is what the physicists have been able to kind of come up with, and certainly probably the picture is still being painted as we learn more. But at one point, all the matter and energy that exists in the totality of the universe could have been concentrated on, something the size of a golf ball. And then it explodes. And the little golf ball is like infinitely dense, infinitely heavy, and then explodes. Well, that's utterly mind-boggling to think of that. And then the question is, well, where was the golf ball? Did the golf ball always exist? What was outside the golf ball? right? And certain, physicists will tell us that the universe is a sort of maybe expanding bubble or things like that. But the question is why does the golf ball even exist? And if you at some point you're thinking, well, these are sort of silly questions. Well, they are maybe if you are, if maybe as Plato would say, and maybe even Nietzsche, if you're just hung up and preoccupied with sort of getting on with taking care of your material conditions, right? But certainly we could see like this: who am I? Why am I here? How should I live? Why is there evil? Maybe after death. For a lot of people, I'm sure, if you just talk to friends, relatives, look through your social media feeds or whatever, the pandemic really has had this sort of effect of maybe helping people to sort of recalibrate things a little bit or see things a little bit differently. Okay. So the other thing that I didn't write up here, but I think might be useful for us to think about is in philosophy, there are sort of three broad areas. And the first one is going to be ethics. And I hope you can see this, but I will just say this. Philosophy is this sort of, the philosophy has these dimensions to them. And the first dimension of philosophy is ethics. And I'm kind of running out of room here, so I'll just kind of say this slowly. But ethics in general is the study of right action and or character. So ethics is the study of right action and or character. Ethics is the study of right action and or character. Okay? And so certainly ethics would get with this idea of how should I live, right? So how should I live? But if you were to ask somebody, or if somebody were to ask you this question, well, how should you live? And you maybe said, I am convinced that the way I should live, if I don't know anything else, is to treat other people as I would want to be treated. Okay. And this idea is not, and if you've heard that, it's kind of the golden rule, and it's certainly found in the Christian Bible, right? But this idea of treating people as you would want them to treat you is found in a lot of other different cultures as well, right? But if you were to say, yeah, I'm really convinced that that's it. Life, how should I live? I should treat other people as I should wish to be treated. The other person might respond, well, how do you know that? Okay, how do you know that's right? Well, that's a really good question. How do you know that that's right? I might respond, well, I just know that I like to be treated a certain way, and I would want to treat people that way as well. Okay, but the question is, well, is that true for everybody, or is that just something that you like? The question is really, how do you know? So when we started talking about knowing and how do we know things, this deals with an area in philosophy called epistemology. Epistemology, okay? And episteme in Greek means knowledge. So, and then logos in Greek means kind of word, but here it just means over time logos, and this is where we get biology and zoology and all these things. It also takes on this idea of the study of. So this is the study of knowledge. But it's not, but it's much deeper than this, because epistemology is the study of knowledge as knowledge. Epistemology is the study of knowledge as knowledge. So what does it mean to know something? Okay. I mean, if I have an idea in my head, or if you tell me, like, let's just say you were to give me a mathematical equation, I could know what the mathematical equation is. What is it? What's the famous one by Einstein? E equals mc squared, I think. Don't hold me to it. I'm not a physicist. But let's just say the theory of relativity, E equals mc squared. Okay, well, I have that in my head. And I could say, if you were to ask me, hey, do you know the theory of relativity? I could say, and not necessarily be wrong, well, it's E equals mc squared. Okay. But would I really know the theory of relativity? I have a knowledge of what the formula is made up of, but I may not necessarily know how to work that formula out. So it looks like there can be different modes of knowing. Well, ultimately then, what is knowledge? Okay, because it seems like it might be something different or deeper than just having an idea or a fact in my mind or memory. Okay, and then certainly epistemology is going to touch on certain psychological questions. You know, what is the relationship of the brain to knowing? All right, and certainly the brain has a lot to do with our knowing and understanding. But is knowing reducible to the brain? There are going to be some people who say yes, and there are going to be other people who say no, that knowing in a real sense is sort of deeper than just what takes place sort of physiologically and neurologically in the brain, even though the brain for human beings is a necessary condition, it seems, for knowing. But it might not be a sufficient condition. And just the difference between that, if we were to think of a car, I mean, a necessary condition for a car is to have wheels, but that's not sufficient if it doesn't have an engine, right? There's got to be, it's a totality, right? So epistemology. And so then when we talk about knowing, okay, we're kind of asking, well, knowing what? What is it that we know? And usually we say we know things like, I know this formula, I know this person, I know how to bake a cake, I know the details of the Battle of Midway, or whatever, right? But all of those objects, and I'm just saying it, all those objects of knowledge are things sort of outside myself. Okay. I could also say I know my name. I know kind of what I like and don't like. But then there's this sort of mysterious thing of where we say there's certain things I do and I don't know why I do those. Well, that's kind of an odd thing too. But this sort of knowing, when we're talking about knowing things, this idea of things or stuff, we're starting to touch on an area of philosophy, and really this is kind of the big area. This is kind of the big area because, sorry, got an S. Metaphysics. Metaphysics. In metaphysics, if you can kind of intuit, meta means beyond. Metaphysics means just beyond the physical. So in other words, this question here is sort of a metaphysical question. Why is there something rather than nothing? There's a certain sense in which even if we're saying why is there evil, and certainly evil would deal with the area of ethics, but the fact that does evil exist, how does it exist, okay, is a metaphysical question. And metaphysics for us in philosophy, metaphysics is the study of knowledge, or I'm sorry, metaphysics is the study of reality as reality. Metaphysics is the study of reality as reality. It is the study of reality as such. So really, in metaphysics, we're asking, what is ultimately real? Okay. What is that? Okay. And this can be sort of a complex sort of question. I mean, in a certain sense, we could say, yeah, the real things are the things that I can see and touch and feel. But then, you know, people will say, there are people who have sort of religious sort of leanings, and then they would say that, well, no, there's something beyond the physical world. And that would be sort of the realm of the divine or of God, right? Certainly the great three monotheistic traditions that come out of the West, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, certainly share this sort of conception. But if you look to the great religions of the East, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Shinto, Sikhism, all of these have certain conceptions of what reality is, right? If you're a strict philosophical Buddhist, you would say that what we take to be real is actually all an illusion. It's Maya. All of this is Maya. The thought that you even have a self is Maya. What is Maya? It's an illusion, right? Whereas maybe in the Western monotheistic traditions, they would say, well, to the extent that man in the physical world's existence is dependent on the existence of God. And in that sense, they're less real than God in the sense that God is reality as such. God is being as such. And really, this is kind of what metaphysics is getting at. Like, what is being? Okay? What gives things its existence? And so this is going to be a question that we're going to be kind of coming back to again and again in this course, is sort of the idea of what is real, because ultimately that's what philosophy is aiming at. Now here, it's important for you to remember again that you have to kind of think through this yourself. I kind of have my ideas about this. And I think I can make an argument for them. But in reality, nobody can decide these questions for you. You have to come to see these things for yourself. But it's important that you go through the experience of asking yourself questions and thinking about these things and reflecting on them. And that doesn't necessarily mean to think that, I mean, certainly if you come in here, it's not necessarily to make you question your whole life and just say, oh, it was all a big lie or something like that. That's not what we're trying to necessarily do here. We're just asking, really in philosophy, what we're trying to do is to ask better questions to get a more or a fuller understanding of the order and mystery of reality. So that's really what we're trying to do. And philosophy, you know, this art of making distinctions, really is this art of asking better questions to understand the order and mystery of reality. So at this point, that sort of, and I guess I'm sort of tipping my hat here, to use an old expression, that I do think it is possible to understand the order and mystery of reality. Now, that does not mean understand it in almost a godlike sense, if we can use that word, where I'm omniscient, okay, I'm all-knowing. But I can certainly sort of understand and appreciate things about the world. And a lot of that, you know, if I'm being honest with you, is sort of understanding the things that you can know and then understanding the things that you can't know. You know, it sort of reminds me, and so this might be part of wisdom. I mean, certainly, you know, there's, and I'll just kind of give you a little piece of advice here, if you don't mind me kind of giving it to you. If you have people that are on completely opposite ends of viewing reality, so somebody like a Friedrich Nietzsche, who is going to be an atheist and someone who doesn't necessarily believe that there really is a good or evil, or that even life has some sort of meaning behind it, to someone like a Plato, and then later in the semester, Joseph Pieper, who's going to be the complete opposite. They are religiously inclined or a religious believer in the case of Pieper's case, and they do believe that there is a sort of a meaning to the world that we can know. But if there is an area where both of these sort of extremes can kind of agree on, that might be something worth taking a look at and remembering. And the thing that might be worth remembering, that a better part of wisdom might be trying to understand the things that I can know versus the things that I can't know. And be willing to work with that. The things that I can know, I probably should try to my utmost ability to try to know and understand those things. The things that I can't know, I have to sort of just maybe kind of leave at peace and just be okay with that. And then it could be that there might be things that are possible to know that I'm just not going to know. Either through maybe lack of skill. I certainly am fascinated by physics, particularly theoretical physics and astrophysics. But if I'm being 100% honest, I just don't have the mathematical sort of ability to do that. As interested as I am, okay? I'm also very interested in foreign languages. But at this point in my life, I mean, I teach Latin, so I feel pretty good about teaching that, right? But I would love to know, French, German. I took Spanish in high school, but, like a lot of high school students, I would probably be okay if I went to Columbia and I had to kind of ask where the restroom was or ask for something to eat or direction. Probably could get by on that. But at this point in my life, there's certain things that I'm just not going to know because there's just not enough time. And, it sort of also reminds me, and maybe some of you have heard, it's called the Serenity Prayer. And I believe it was a prayer that was sort of conceived by this American theologian named Reinhold Niebuhr. And it goes something like, God, grant me the grace to accept, grant me the grace to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to see the difference. Okay? Now, here's the thing. I don't think you would even necessarily, I mean, obviously this is a prayer that Reinhold Niebuhr talks about. And in fact, really this idea isn't unique to him. There's an ancient Greek formulation of this from the Greek philosopher Epictetus. But there's also a Jewish rabbinic tradition that has a similar idea. And then even in the Far East, I think Theravada Buddhism has a sort of a similar idea. Okay? Give me the serenity or the peace to accept things that I can't change, courage to change the things that are within my power to do so, and the wisdom to know the difference between these two things, right? And if you think about it, a lot of our life, sometimes a lot of the grief or the struggle we have in life is trying to change things that we can't. You really can't change other people. There are certain aspects of my children that might sort of, I think might need to be changed or whatever. But there's a certain sense in which, there's a sense in which their personality is just different. Well, I can't change that. Okay, I can't change the fact that a world pandemic comes about. There's nothing I can do about that. I can control and have the courage to control how I react to it, either by being completely ambivalent. I could say that, like, I don't care and just go about my life and not worry about anybody. Well, that would kind of be a wrong way to go about it. But, maybe another wrong way to go about it is to just live completely in fear and not leave my house and get angry at anybody that tries to leave the house or anything. And a lot of philosophy, guys, is just trying to find this sort of balance between things. Another thing, something that you can't change, an example is, my children, because of this thing, been kind of cooped up with one another a lot. And so they're arguing maybe a little more than they used to. But if you were wanting to live life where you were going to try to keep siblings from ever arguing with one another, well, that's just not possible. There is no culture at no time where you didn't have siblings, brothers and sisters or brothers and brothers or whatever, that didn't argue with one another or get into fights. Right? Now, as they get older, hopefully they kind of move beyond that, I know my wife and my brother-in-law could get, from stories I've heard, could get in some pretty big arguments and stuff. And now it's completely fine, because they've grown older and matured. And I guess that's one other point that I want to say here too, is that philosophy is not necessarily just a mental exercise. It's not just merely a mental exercise. Philosophy proceeds by reason and experience. It proceeds by reason and experience. So you can't live life completely in your head. You have to kind of be in the world and have experiences. But then again, you can't live life completely by your own experiences. Your experiences are absolutely important. They make you who you are, and you should be acknowledge things that happen to you and acknowledge the good or the bad that have come from these things. But we have to be kind of careful with our experiences. You know, I had, and you know, my son is on the autism spectrum, and he's in high school now. And obviously, for him, social situations are sometimes tough. And then when he was a younger kid, socially with his peers, it was tough. And if I'm being honest, a lot of kids usually weren't nice to him. Well, as a parent, that you know, it bothers you. And I could get very much where my experience would be, well, when he's around other kids are just jerks and they're not nice. Well, that is true. There would be times when kids would not be nice. But if I made that my sheer filter on how I felt about every child outside of my son, that would be wrong. To say, oh, automatically every kid that comes by, they're going to be mean to my son. Well, that would be wrong. Maybe a lot will, but not everyone. I also had a student very dear to me when I taught high school, and I taught this student from the time he was in the fourth or freshman in high school, and then again when he was a senior. And a nice young man, but unfortunately, a lot of the adults in his life had kind of let him down. And when I had met him, and through a good portion of his high school career, you know, his philosophy was don't trust anybody. If you trust people, you get let down. Well, that's his experience. And it's an experience that he has to be able to express. It's an experience that has to be validated, right? But if he were to take that experience and make that sort of the model of his life, trust no one. Well, the question would be, well, how much of a full life is he going to be able to live? So then reason kind of comes in to, well, is that necessarily the case that you don't trust anybody? Because even while he would say this, there was another young man and another young lady who he was very close with in high school. And I would bring this out to him sometimes, like, look, you're telling me trust no one, but yet it seems like, I mean, you're relying on them to give you a ride to school and all this stuff. It seems like you do have trust in some people, and you're wanting a better life for yourself. You don't necessarily want to go down the same path as some of the adults in your life. And you're trusting that your teachers are wanting to do right by you, at least that I've got your best interest at heart, and I'm writing, you know, letters to, recommendation letters and stuff like that for colleges and stuff. And so at some point, he kind of had to work through that. And then reason, and, you know, later on, you know, when I saw him later on in college, you know, he was kind of acknowledged like, yeah, you know, you do have to kind of learn to trust people. And so the question is, you know, for him, that his experience is important and is worthy of being validated as it was, also needed to be balanced through sort of reason and common experience. And reason here doesn't necessarily mean mathematical reasoning or I have a high IQ. Reason means, well, look, yeah, I'm saying trust no one, and there are some people who have betrayed my trust. So common sense might tell me I'm not going to just put my whole life into that person's hands. But then, is it really the case that I don't trust anybody? Because I do have these two friends over here, and I do rely on them. And there are a few teachers that look like they are kind of looking out for me. And so you just have to filter that. So one, you can't completely live in your own head where you just say experience doesn't matter. And, you know, I just have this theory about life, and that's what I do. Um, but then you can't do the other, right? And so, really, guys, a lot of life is maintaining a certain sort of balance, okay? Is achieving a certain sort of balance. And to be honest with you, that's probably, and this is just my opinion, you don't have to kind of parrot this back or believe it, but that's really a lot of life, is learning how to kind of keep things in sort of an equilibrium. And it's a hard thing to do because why? Life is not always coming to us on an equilibrium. It's kind of up and it's down. We're up and we're down, and then the people in our lives are up and down. Okay. But I think philosophy can kind of help us do this. I really think that if you give this course sort of give it your best effort, and by your best effort, I don't mean just academic effort, but I mean really sort of open yourself up and ask these questions and think of these things. I will say this, and I'm pretty adamant about this. This is going on my 15th year teaching philosophy here at Lone Star. And every semester, without fail, I find students who acknowledge that the things that they've learned in this class in some ways have helped them and help deepen them, or maybe help them see things in a different manner. I'm not saying you're going to get the answer to the mystery of life, and then you leave the class and it's all just rays of sunshine and all this stuff. But a lot of life, guys, is just trying to get one rung in the ladder. This class can be a rung in the ladder. And my hope for you as you move on, that your education won't terminate with your degree at Lone Star, but that you'll continue to want to learn and to grow. And a lot of that learning and growing can happen by thinking philosophically and then reading and thinking about philosophy. And I know a lot of you, and there's certain times in our lives where we're busy, and I know a lot of you, because I can remember being in this position myself. You're working maybe long hours, and you're taking multiple classes, and you're trying to support yourself. And I want to encourage you, to hang in there, but to make time for yourself to think about these things. And to the degree that you can, find other people who want to talk about these things and think about these things. And they don't all have to think like you. I'll be honest, I'm sort of religiously sympathetic, but I have some people that I get together with and I would count as friends, and I would hope they would see me in the same way. They're not necessarily religious. One person in particular is not, doesn't even, believes in God. And yet we have great conversations and we're sort of interested in the same things. And even though, we may get together and have friendly arguments about this sort of thing, it isn't the sort of thing that completely alienates us from one another. Because we have a sort of a relationship or a friendship. So the one thing that I'll do is after every class, if philosophy is sort of understanding what it's all about, the philosopher Thomas Aquinas once said that philosophy and poetry are related because they are both concerned with the marvelous, or the wonderful, or the mysterious. So I usually like to end every class with a poem. You don't have to pay for this. You don't even have to sit here and parse it out and tell me what it means. Um, there's nothing wrong with doing that on a certain level if you're just trying to, understand, iambic pentameter or, what a simile or metaphor is, and that's fine. The poems are not really, in your English teachers and literature teachers, professors would say the same thing. Unfortunately, sometimes they have to go through these things. But they would agree with this, that poetry is not meant to be dissected. It is meant to be experienced and reflected upon. Um, and so this poem is by the poet Kenneth Rexroth. And the poem is called, and I think aptly enough, Education. And maybe if you would like, maybe you can look this poem up, Education, by Kenneth Rexroth, Rexroth. Maybe you can look at this poem and maybe tell me, how is this an education? Just think about it. And maybe how is it related to philosophy? But that's just something for you to do. So Education by Kenneth Rexroth. Now to the dry hillside, terraced with crumbling limestone, where there are vineyards long ago, evening comes cool and violet under the olive trees, and only the almond blossoms and the first stars are alight. Your fine lean hand, like a spindle of light, moves as you talk, as if you were conducting a slow music. What are you talking about? You're explaining everything to me. The abandoned olive grove, the walls older than the Romans, the flowering almond tree, and the twilight darkening around the stars and around your speaking lips and moving hand. Well, guys, I hope you have a great rest of the week. If you have any questions or concerns about anything, please email me, and I look forward to experiencing philosophy with you this semester. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.